Let's check in with the doc and look at things with a wider lens. Pastor Richards on OMG.
Hello, good morning.
Hey, good morning, Daniil. Good morning to everyone.
Pastor saying good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Flex. That's Flex, right?
Yes, it's
Yes,
Flex.
this is Flex.
Flex, can I submit my playlist for throwback, or you would have to be vetted by Mario?
You can do that, yes, sir.
You all are throwing back to 5 years. I don't know if that's a throwback. What happened to 80s music? You all don't touch those?
I had a conversation with Mario this morning, but that's not my area.
Best era. I could call some names. You probably Flex probably doesn't even know half of that. I don't know Marvin. Well, never mind. He won't know.
I think maybe submit the list to Mario, and then he will. Yes.
A great era of music, but unfortunately, throwback Thursdays for the youngsters can't throw back past their date of birth.
Pastor, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Yesterday, by the way, I have to give thanks, say a shout out for those who. Some people do send me feedback on my commentary pieces, and yesterday I got a little bit of feedback on that piece on tokenism, optics, and window dressing. It seems to me that it resonated. I started basically with the U.S. and affirmative action and the token placement of and token rise of, blacks are on the rise in certain places, but I viewed it from the position of tokenism under or through the scope of affirmative action and how that blurs any real progress for blacks. And then I brought it home and talked about other matters of tokenism and window dressing vis-a-vis or as compared with real effectiveness. Sometimes you do things to, put up a firewall and keep people's mouth shut, but when you examine it at the core, it's basically just a window dressing that was put up. So I just wanted to provoke some thoughts as to where is the window dressing, where is the tokenism, and got some feedback. One of the most interesting was a gentleman from Georgia who listened to the program, and by the way, this is a white guy, Caucasian. And I was very pleased with his feedback. He actually let me know, sent me a voice note to let me know that he thought I was on point and that it was deep and that these were matters that I'm uncomfortable. They're uncomfortable matters. They make people angry when you talk about the fact that what you have done is just window dressing. I want to see behind the window. And he appreciated the fact that, even if, the message was targeted to those who are in power, who are actually doing the window dressing, he thought that it was deep and provocative enough. And most of my listeners know that this week I've been talking about change and the thing that is a retardant firewall to change is the massive cost that comes with that endeavor. In my sermon, I told you guys that I said change is such a disruptive thing that you begin to disrupt the status quo, and it makes people uncomfortable. The sort of pushback, I had another Caucasian friend call me, I think, or talked with me on Tuesday, it was, and talked about how uncomfortable he felt with the rioting and the looting and that aspect that had been hijacked. But, people get uncomfortable and people push back. I've seen, for example, different news outlets who are not embracing the change or the push for the change, the way they are characterizing and caricaturing this effort. Because it's disrupting the status quo. Even here in Little St. Vincent, you try to do any meaningful change, you disrupt the status quo, you disrupt the order of things, and there's a cost that comes with that. You interrupt the flow. It could interrupt your job, it could interrupt your prospects, it could interrupt, your connections. That is a cost of change. Change is costly, and maybe that's the retardant, maybe that's the firewall. As soon as you begin to become the genesis of change, as soon as you begin to become the voice of change, as soon as you're beginning to get traction and coalesce, with people around you, the smear campaigns that would go out there, and your name, which is a valuable entity, respect and your testimony to two closely related things are going to be damaged. Once I've seen it happen over and over again. Any voice that is disruptive enough and seem to attract and change, or at least gain momentum and a little bit of traction, one of the costs that you have to consider is the smear campaign, basically to render you ineffective voice to be laughed at. And because people value their public image and value popularity and value what people say about them, they're a little bit reticent and slow to take on that. They're like, I could do without that. I don't want to generate, I don't want to push change. I can do so under a pseudonym or something, but to come out, for example, publicly and protest and to give an outcry or to call out things, not necessarily to shame people, although that is a fringe aspect, but to call out things the way you should call it out. You begin to do that, you're going to be smeared. So I talked this week about the fact that even in places where change is desperately needed, because people consider the cost of change is probably not going to be pushed that hard. Yesterday, for example, I talked about another retardant. And Monday, I talked about the cost of change being a retardant. Yesterday, I talked about a massive firewall that I think is intentionally set up, the firewall of tokenism and window dressing. Because if you can do things for a show, if you can, give X amount of things that changes, what is it? You give a man a fish instead of teaching him how to fish. Well, that's the old tenet, but I say you give a man a fish, give him a boat. Don't even teach him how to fish, because it is frustrating to teach a man to fish and he doesn't have the equipment to fish with. So don't even just teach him how to fish. Give him a boat. So, but we get the firewall, the retardant, to keep people. You just give him a fish and he eats and he's satisfied for a little bit. That's tokenism, man. That's tokenism. Little handouts are tokenism. And as a socialist ploy, little handouts to keep people quiet for, a little bit of time. Because one of the things that we have learned very well, probably occasioned by slavery, is that the people in our part have, they don't have what is called the long view. So we think in terms, remember that term, long view. We think in terms of the short term and immediate gratification. And you can placate, satiate, and satisfy a lot of our people with short-term renderings, and give them things in the short run, and keep them quiet and muzzle them by giving them things, and they won't desperately call for change. But that's just a window dressing. The giving of the fish rather than teaching people to fish, and furthermore giving them the equipment to fish with. You just firewall and window dressing, as far as I'm concerned. So this brings me to the Serenity Prayer that I've given over the past day, because this week I'm focused on change. And this brings me to the Serenity Prayer, which I have never seen this prayer as being troublesome until this week, I will tell you, Danielle. Really, it's a prayer that I have taught my daughter. And recently, when I say recently, over the past month, I re-echoed it to her. And then this week I got to be thinking, I'm like, I don't know that I like this Serenity Prayer that much. This is going to annoy people. The Serenity Prayer says that they ask, you ask God to grant you the serenity to accept the things you cannot change, the courage to change the things you can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And we all love the Serenity Prayer because it flows well, but I got to thinking just this week, I don't like that first line. the first line that says, grant me the serenity. There's some words there that trouble me. In the first line, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. The three words that trouble me in that line, first line, is serenity. And serenity is the antidote to agitation. I'll let you know that right off. Serenity just placates you, and you. Sometimes I wonder if where we should have agitation, we have too much serenity. And maybe we have an overdose, and maybe our people have become overdosed on serenity. So that's one of the words that troubles me, this serenity and placidity that really nullifies any great movement towards agitation and activism. Serenity in any country where there is a massive amount of serenity, you're not an overdose of serenity. You're not going to have much, agitation, activism. So that right there is a retardant to change. Too much serenity. Even if there are things that are there that need changing, that level of serenity really becomes an antidote. And then the next word in that prayer that is bothersome is the word accept. Because acceptance lends itself to the whole idea of conformity to the status quo. And anyone that studies any form of history knows this, that it is the dissatisfaction with the status quo that becomes the genesis to change. So anytime you get to the point where you are accepting of the status quo, you have basically denied any impetus whatsoever for change. So that's the second word in that prayer that bothers me. Acceptance. And I've actually asked myself, do we have too much of an acceptance here in St. Vincent of things that ought to change? I mean, this is asking a question. I'm just asking a question. And then the third thing that really bothers me in that first line is this whole, I cannot change. Serenity to accept the things I cannot change. Cannot? How do you know that you can't? Who told you that you can't? What restricts you? What understanding do you have of yourself and your power or powerlessness that you have come to the conclusion that you cannot change? And sometimes I think that cannot is a substitute for won't. In other words, it's not so much that you cannot change, it's simply a matter that you won't change. You refuse to change. You don't want change. And I think that is a gross misunderstanding of our power, the extent of our power. The power of not just black people, but the power of the average citizen to wrought and generate change. When people don't know their power, they remain placid. So we have to begin to ask ourselves, what is the power of not just one voice, but what is the power of many, many voices in this land calling for the same thing, like we have seen across LA, and we have seen in New York, and we have seen in Chicago, and we have seen in not Houston, but in Dallas. We have seen people, the one might be powerless, but the many together becomes a great source of power. So that serenity prayer troubles me because that line, grant me the serenity to accept things that I cannot change. And I think that line gets in the way of the second line, courage to change the things I can. So we have to ask ourselves then, what are the things that need changing that are not being changed here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines? And I believe, Daniel, because I don't have much time to sell these thoughts this morning, okay, truly, but these are things that are resonating from the depths of my heart. And you know it is because this is not the first time that I've spoken about the placidity of St. Vincent and the way the status quo is maintained over an extended period of time. It's not the first time that I've spoken these things. It is not to suggest, therefore, that we don't have things here in St. Vincent that need changing. I mean, we are not an ideal utopian society. We have things that need changing, so we have to confront and ask ourselves, but why is it that there's not such a strong push? We don't have protests on the streets regularly. This is not an indictment necessarily against the government for those who are thinking that this is political. This is not what this is about. This is an understanding that no society is utopian, ideal, and therefore there are always going to be things that would bring a measure of dissatisfaction. and would provoke change. So I ask myself here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, what's the main matter? It's the same thing all over the world. The main driver that provokes a demand for change is injustice all across the world. You're seeing protests, although the Minneapolis thing started with George Floyd, Minneapolis. You're seeing protests in Milan. You're seeing protests in London. You're seeing protests in Sydney. You're seeing protests, I think I saw one in Tokyo or somewhere in Japan. You're seeing protests all across the world. Why? Because injustice is not an American phenomenon. Injustice is a global phenomenon. And people understand the core of the issue is that we have to stand up and call for justice. So this matter that is happening right now and this impetus and wave of change across the globe is not about George Floyd anymore. It is about people understanding that we are dissatisfied with the level of justice that we have. Now, to bring this home, there are three types of justices that we really ought to be very concerned about and be agitating for, rather than saying, well, I have the serenity to accept the things I can't change. No, stop it, stop. Have the courage to agitate for three different types of justices. By the way, amazingly, all of these are well supported in the Bible. Retributive justice, which we call criminal justice, the Bible deals with that. Distributive justice, which I happen to think that the main essence of our dissatisfaction and the main driver to provoke our calls for change is this whole matter of distributive justice. The greatest injustices in our society are not retributive criminal justice. The greatest injustices in our society basically relates to distributive justice. How is power distributed? How is land distributed? Are we satisfied? Are we satisfied? Have we done nothing about it because we are serene about it? Land distribution in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, for example, continues to be a pet peeve of mine. Who owns the lands? How I do some research. How did they obtain the lands? We go in historically back into the 50s and 60s and the pork barreling and the other systems by which some people came into many, many acres of land. And how are we going to dispossess them of this land? I know this is not a popular kind of conversation to have. But I believe that these are the issues that should be at the forefront of the minds of, because land allows people to get a sense of identity and to establish themselves. And when you have distributive injustice with respect to who own the lands, how they are obtained, we have a system that allows for large landowners. We have a system that punishes squatters. By the way, I have a high admiration for squatters. This is why my kind of commentary is not popular. But when a man is squatting, you don't punish him, as used to happen. When a man is squatting, that says that he wants to settle down and find somewhere for himself. And I think actually it is a social salve. It is a social salve when a man squats. Or you want him to be homeless and create more social problems. Allow the man to squat. So I find that there is a massive injustice in a system that allows large landowners to have lands that lie fallow and not used, and at the same time, in the same paradigm, to have people that you're punishing for squatting or you drive them off or find ways of dispossessing them of the little piece of land that they're squatting on. That's distributive injustice. I can go on and on the level of the distributive justice, on the matter of distributive justice in St. Vincent, but I just don't have the time to talk about the housing issues. I appreciate the fact that the government has done the low-income housing scheme and all of that. But yet, I still think that in terms of access to proper facilities for building and loans and all of that, that I think that some people are considered high risk and some people are just left out because they can't meet minimal requirements to become landowners and house owners. And even when they do, in a short space of time, the structures and strictures of the banking system, before too long, these same people are dispossessed of whatever little they try to put. I'm not making these things up. These are things that are happening in St. Vincent. And if you don't believe me, check the real estate agents and see their list of, and the banks, to see their list of homes that they're selling out. selling people out of their homes. These are things that they can be fixed. Economic opportunity here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. If you didn't know it, the large masses of our people, there's a fraction of our people, a tiny fraction, we won't call names, but we know names, that are in possession of a higher percentage of our, look, all I'm saying here, let me just say it safely, income is not equally distributed in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And a majority of people are scrunting, but we do have some people who are wealthy. But this is something that happens all across the world. But this kind of disparity, these are the things that we ought to promote. What's being done in St. Vincent with respect to distributive justice regarding economic opportunity. Nepotism, is that what determines jobs and further education and contracts and leases? Pork barreling? How are some of the leases and tenders rewarded and accepted? Is it pork barreling, favoritism? What's the level of distributive justice? These are the things that when we fail to agitate and when we accept this serenity to accept the things we cannot change, or when we come to the mindset that we cannot change, then we allow for the extended existence of distributive injustice. So unlike America and other places where there's a social clamoring and currently social activism to provoke change, there are pockets in our world where we have, it's not like we are in ideal situation and all of that. We have our own issues that we should be clamoring and calling for change. But you know what? We have the serenity to accept the things because we believe we cannot change them. Here's a close. The Bible is, I said this before, the Bible is concerned with retributive justice. The Bible is concerned highly with distributive justice and does not promote, although the Bible promotes contentment, the Bible does promote also an agitation in the face of distributive injustice. Classic passage Micah 6:8 says, God requires justice, and that includes distributive justice, that you love kindness and you walk uprightly. The great prophet Isaiah, what did he say? He says, God will shut his ears from you. He will not listen to you. He won't answer your prayer. He will turn your back on you until you learn to do good, until you learn to seek justice, until you learn to correct oppression. This is Isaiah 1:17. Until you learn to bring justice to the disempowered, until you plead the cause of the disenfranchised. That's what you have to be doing. And then the Bible talks about the best kind of justice is all. It would be remiss of me if I don't close with this. The best kind of justice of all is restorative justice. The justice by which we are all restored into a relationship with God. The justice that is, and that's as equal as it comes. Galatians 3:20, it says, when it comes to this matter, everyone, we are all equal. Whether Jews or Scythian or Greek or whatever, we are all equal. We have the same kind of justice. What kind of justice is that? It's the justice that Galatians 5:1 talks about, where we have a liberty with the great judge who is God, that all of our debt and sins, everything that needs forgiveness, the great judge says forgiven because of the penalty that was paid by his son Jesus. So the Bible is really a champion of retributive justice, criminal justice, distributive justice, and restorative justice. And these are the things that we need to be advocating, clamoring, and agitating for. The next time you say the serenity prayer, think it through. Is it that you have too much serenity and too much acceptance and too much of a mindset that you cannot change? Shouldn't you ask a little bit more for the courage to change the things you can? Shouldn't you ask a little bit more for courage to change the things that need changing, and wisdom to know the difference? Have a blessed weekend.
All right, thanks, Pastor.
Take care.
Let's check in with the doc and look at things with a wider lens. Pastor Richards on OMG.